As Reverend Christina introduced me earlier, my name is Pam Rumancik, and just to let you know, it rhymes with romantic, so that helps. Rumancik, romantic. I'm a queer cisgendered woman, and my pronouns are she and hers, and I'm really grateful to be with you today. Yesterday, I was driving up here from Illinois, and I was in a fight with my GPS. I had picked out the most direct route from Woodstock, Illinois up to Appleton, but it kept suggesting a detour that took me through Milwaukee. It would save me 13 minutes. Google Maps is programmed to avoid a beautiful drive through the Kettle Moraine countryside and going through a busy city, and it was not what I was going to do. And I won. Yay. Often what society values and what is actually good don't really line up. And it reminded me of a story about Henry David Thoreau and his observation that he felt it was better to walk 30 miles through the woods to the nearby town of Fitchburg, rather than to lose a whole day working to earn the fare for that trip on a train. He preferred to be fully present to his own life, rather than relinquish those hours it would have taken to earn that money in order to save time by going by rail. How do each of us use the hours that we are given? How do we make sure that we are present to the life that's in front of us? It's a question that much of humanity has forgotten to even ask anymore, but it's a really great question, isn't it? Reverend Christina is going to be wrestling with questions like this in the next months, and I'm really grateful that she invited me to be your sabbatical care minister during that time. I've known Stina since we were in seminary together, and she's a person that knows how to fit a lot of life into a short bit of time. Back at Meadville, I would get tired just watching her. Often she would offer talents to this people and these people and be doing this and be running that program. And she could pack more into one day than I could do in a whole week, maybe even two. I hope you notice that I'm lowering your expectations for what I'm bringing you. I know I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. But with all that busyness, there is a yin and a yang to life. And when you are so busy, you also need to rest. And our society often doesn't value that balance. And it constantly is pushing each of us to fit more and more and more into the infinite number of hours that we have. But our bodies simply cannot keep doing that. I mean, the most efficient thing to do was to not waste any time even sleeping. But you know that doesn't work. Because bodies without sleep are not bodies for too long. They break down. They stop. And it's the same in our spiritual and emotional lives as well. It is good and necessary to take rest, to breathe, to make space for dreaming and pondering, to make space in our being for new ideas to come forth, for new ways of being in the world to emerge, so that we can really fully embrace the life that's in front of us. Now, the idea of sabbatical is a very ancient one because it's born out of a time when humans understood that nothing good can just keep going and keep going and keep going well. And Reverend Christina is going to be taking a pause. And you know what? So are you. In your generosity and compassion and wisdom, you've set up time for Stina to do some of this soul work. It's a gift to her. But you know what? In the deepest sense, it is also a gift to each of you. Because it's a way to walk rather than taking the train, a way to pause and smell the roses and see the leaves on the ground and to pay attention to what's happening in the sky. It's a way for all of us to remember that life is not simply about doing, about accomplishing, about getting things off our to-do list. Rather, it is a journey that we are all on together. And when we remember that journey, it helps us to remember our deepest connections with ourselves, with the universe, and with one another. I am really happy to be able to walk with you while Reverend Christina is taking her time. Who knows? Maybe you're going to have something amazing and new to share with her when she gets back. I look forward to getting to know you in the next couple months and finding ways to be together. And please reach out to me if there's anything I can do to support your journeys. Blessed be.
Thank you, Pam. When I first heard the story of Frederick the Mouse, it was around the time that I first knew Pam. I was in my mid-20s. I was in grad school. I was working a couple jobs, volunteering, and I admit that I did not get the point of the story. The mouse was cute, but really I thought his whole shtick to convince everyone that he was actually doing something useful was a bit of a facade to cover up his lazy ass. But today, many years later, and in a very different phase of my life, having survived a global pandemic when so many people didn't, in a world racked by war and trauma, I see Frederick a whole lot differently now. I've been thinking about death a lot lately. Maybe it's the season that we're in, Halloween and All Souls and Samhain just passed. We just did 2 Sunday services about end of life and what happens after we die. So I was certainly thinking about it in preparation for those services. We just finished the installation of phase 1 of our memorial garden. So I guess it makes sense that I've been thinking a lot about death. And one of the things I did last week, because I told you all to make sure you have a file, memorial file here at the fellowship, I made sure that my memorial file has everything in it that I want. I have one, and it still says what I want it to say. But one of the things that I name in my pre-written obituary is that when I die, I hope that I am remembered for how much I loved my family. I especially want my children to know in their bones that I adore them. And I hope that I am remembered for having a ministry that mattered. Thinking about death makes us think about life and meaning and purpose. What will I be remembered for? Last month, as I prepared for our October worship theme of It's Alive, where we were considering Unitarian Universalist history and heritage, I found a sermon from a colleague of mine, Reverend Dr. Carl Gregg. And in that sermon, he explored luminaries from our UU ministry history. These are the people who are famous for all of the things they contributed to our faith. We talk about them in sermons. We name our rooms after them. They are the famous preachers, writers, theologians, people like William Ellery Channing, the Unitarian preacher who claimed for us the name Unitarian and first clearly framed our theology. Theodore Parker, the prolific Unitarian preacher and writer, Thomas Starr King, the Unitarian preacher who saved the Union during the Civil War, A. Powell Davies, the UU minister who planted numerous UU churches around Washington, D.C. Beltway, James Luther Adams, the theologian famous for the 5 smooth stones of liberal religion, which we did a sermon series on here last year. But Reverend Gregg's sermon was about how all of these people, these influential figures, hurt themselves, destroyed relationships with their families, got themselves very sick, or even died because they worked themselves to the bone. Channing's early career stress and exhaustion permanently damaged his adrenal glands, causing a lifelong battle with a weakened immune system. Parker's similar workaholism forced him into an early retirement from ill health, and he died from tuberculosis at the age of 50. Starr King's hectic pace of study, travel, speaking caused him to collapse from diphtheria and pneumonia, dying at the age of 39. A. Powell Davies died at 55 from a recurrence of phlebitis that he aggravated repeatedly with his intense work schedule. And James Luther Adams' wife and family begrudged his ministry because he was never home with them. They have publicly named that challenge after his death. I don't want to be that UU minister in history. I don't care if I'm famous. It's easy to laud these incredible people and their incredible accomplishments, and yet we forget the human toll of that kind of work. I don't want to live like that, and I don't want to be remembered like that. And I appreciate Pam naming my energy, but in fact, the last several years of ministry, my health and family challenges, global pandemic, they have taken away a lot of my vibrancy and spunk. And I want to get it back, perhaps at a more sustainable pace. The Trappist monk and activist Thomas Merton once famously said, "The rush and pressure of modern life are a form, perhaps the most common form, of its innate violence. To allow oneself to be carried away by a multitude of conflicting concerns, to surrender to too many demands, to commit oneself to too many projects, to want to help everyone and everything is to succumb to violence." He continues, "The frenzy of the activist neutralizes their own work because it kills the root of inner wisdom which makes work fruitful." End quote. Reverend Greg's sermon was not just for UU ministers. It was a caution or an encouragement for everyone, for all of us to take care of ourselves, to refuse to be a part of the innate violence of the rush and pressure of modern life, even if it means just taking a breath. In preparation for my sabbatical time, I started reading a book called At Your Best by Reverend Carey Nieuwhof, who's a clergy and leadership coach. He says, if this season of busyness or stress in your life never ends, it's not a season, it's your life. If you find yourself at every check-in saying, I'm just in a really busy time, maybe examine that and what's going on there. We all have to examine if this is how we want to live, as Mary Oliver says, our one wild and precious life. The focus of the month of November here at the fellowship is yours, mine, and ours. We're considering the path of generosity and abundance through the lens of deeply understanding what is ours alone and what is available to share. And spoiler alert for the next 3 weeks, almost everything is to share. When it comes to the ministry of this fellowship, that is no exception. Some things are mine, but as I head off on sabbatical, I will hand them to Phyllis, our Director of Finance and Operations, and to Reverend Hannah. And Reverend Hannah will not be able to hold all of the things that I hand to her and the things she's currently holding, so she's going to have to hand some things to Reverend Pam. And a lot of it is actually ours, yours, not just the ministers. One of the groups that I have recently joined out in the community is the Parent Teacher Organization, or PTO, at my kids' elementary school. Just kind of a joiner. Sorry, I am. Hannah's like, yes, you are. And since it's a PTO and not a PTA or association, there are no actual formal structures or dues in this organization. And what they say is that everyone who has a kid at this school is on the PTO. Not everybody does the same. Some people do more, some people do less, but if you have a kid, you're already on it. And that reminds me of our fellowship. So let's try this. I'd like you to raise your hand if you serve on our worship team or on the care team. Raise your hand. Now, everyone raise your hand. You all serve on the worship team and the care team. You have important roles in making our services successful, even if it just means being here. Your presence matters. You also all have a very important role in caring for each other, giving and receiving care. It is not only the job of the pastoral care minister or the care team. Next, could you please raise your hand if you serve as a welcomer, greeter, usher, or on our generosity and engagement ministries team? Well, raise your hands up. Come on, you can do it. Very good. Now, everyone, raise your hand. You got it. Even if you're not on the committee, you still have a role to welcome people into this place, to connect with people you've never met. I know that you come on Sunday mornings and you're looking forward to seeing your friends, but it's really important to keep your eyes and ears open, make sure that you're welcoming people in, looking around, saying to someone, I don't know if we've met. That is, let's say that together. I don't know if we've met. That is the thing you say, not, are you new here? Because they're like, no, I've been coming here for 40 years. Where have you been? I don't know if we've met, right? It's a good one. It's also everyone's role to make sure that this fellowship is financially stable. It's not only the role of the ministers or Phyllis or the generosity and engagement ministries. We need you each to consider how you support this place financially. Now raise your hand if you serve in our religious education program as a teacher, assistant, mentor, facilitator. Thank you. Some of those people are in the back, but yeah. Now everyone, come on, you got it. Yep, there you go. You are all have a role in helping to raise the next generation of UUs. We need you, whether it's simply by talking to the kids who are sitting near you or asking the youth what's going on in their lives or helping out on occasion in our programs. You are a part of that shared ministry, and it's really, really important. Children don't necessarily remember everything they were taught in their classroom, but they remember if they felt included at the fellowship. That's what they'll remember. Supporting shared ministry is one of the goals of a healthy congregation during a minister's sabbatical. The things that look like they're mine, they become clear in my absence that they're actually all of ours. And we're going to practice that during this time so that when I come back, hopefully that muscle will be strong and I won't have to take everything back. I don't want to do that. I recognize that an extended sabbatical is not possible for everyone. I wish that it were. I recognize the privilege that I have in taking this time. It's an incredible privilege. I also honor that our congregation is modeling what health looks like in work and life by allowing this earned time away in a culture that continually prizes overwork and exhaustion. We as a community are pushing back against that narrative. We're reclaiming the power of Sabbath, of rest. And we're also reclaiming the ways that allowing people to rest from their work means that those people will not be killed by the ministry that they love. It also means that the shared ministries that we have will have a chance to reemerge and maybe change shape. There's an old adage among ministers that they say to keep a ministry successful over the long haul, you have to become a new minister every 5 to 10 years. I'm now in my 7th year here with you, and the last several years have been marked by a lot of change, love, laughter, loss, challenge, political strife, and this little thing, this global pandemic that we all lived through, which was truthfully a very, very hard time to be a minister. And I'm only now sort of realizing how hard. These last 6 or so years have been in some ways also for us together an interim ministry or a developmental ministry, because we've been transitioning away from the long and beloved ministry of our first called senior minister, Reverend Roger Birchhausen. But I'm ready to shift into a new phase of ministry with you as we move into the future together. I'm ready for this time away to be a chance to reset for me and for you so that I can continue in a new way when I return. Different ministers and staff and committee members and friends are going to need to engage with the ministries of this fellowship in new ways while I'm away. But it will help us flex our shared ministry muscles and find new ways to connect. In a world that is only increasingly becoming more complex and troubled, we need each other. We need each other in every possible way, and we need each other to be our whole selves, not just bits and pieces of the parts of ourselves that are left over after all the other exhausting work is done. So how can we all be a little bit more like Frederick? Helping to remember that while work is important and necessary, I mean, the mice still had to have corn and grain and stuff. Cannot live on poetry alone. But in addition to that, that work is not the only thing in life. That beauty and love and color and words and connection with those around us are also powerful pieces of community care. So I invite you to allow this time, this turning of the clock, the darkening of the sky, the chill in the air, to remind you to slow down and take care of yourself and of those around you. Amen. May it be so.
A few weeks ago, I told Reverend Christina that I was excited for the moment when she would finally go on sabbatical so that I could stop having meetings about what we were going to do when she went on sabbatical. I was like, I think these meetings about your sabbatical are going to be more work than your sabbatical. And it's true. The way we distribute work here at the fellowship is going to shift for the next 4 months. And that, right, change and human beings, we love change. We're so good at it. No? True. And so people have asked a lot of anxious questions that are totally understandable about, like, how's it gonna work when Christina's gone? And one of the big ways that it's going to work is that Reverend Pam is here. And the big part of how my role is changing, other than taking on some pieces of Reverend Christina's work, is that I am wrapping pastoral care up into sort of a coherent ball and throwing it to Reverend Pam. And that means that people sort of have asked the question of, can we still call, like, can you still come see me in the hospital? Or like, will you still be available? And the answer is yes. And that the person, right, the person behind the curtain of all the things that make pastoral care go is not going to be me. Because sometimes people think that pastoral care happens like magic, like I just receive on the breeze. Someone tells me that you're in the hospital and then I show up magically, when in fact, when I show up, or when a member of the care team calls you to inquire about something, there's like at least 3 emails that have been exchanged about how that's gonna happen before you receive the call, and that's what I'm handing to Reverend Pam. I love giving away email. I'm really good at it. And so we're going to do a whole ritual thing where we talk about how our roles change in a few minutes, but that some of the structures that are always in place will stay in place. So just like fear not. And if you have any questions, goodness, please ask. But there are 2 tasks that I would say belong to you all. And so are you ready to hear your homework for the next 4 months? Good, because it's yours whether you're ready or not. So here's your 2 big tasks. One is that the fancy term for it is differentiation, which if you've been in some amount of therapy or trained in therapy, you perhaps know that differentiation is the task of figuring out where you end and someone else begins. Usually it's in relationship with a parent or a partner. But differentiation matters between ministers and congregations as well. Right, Reverend Christina mentioned Reverend Roger Birchhausen's long and successful ministry with the congregation. And that the work of the interim period, which I will say, right, and that work has taken longer and is taking longer than the years where you had somebody whose title was interim minister. That the fellowship is still finishing up the work of figuring out where did the particularities of Roger's gifts and growing edges end, and the true identity of the fellowship, separate from any one person's ministry, begin. And that task is true for Reverend Christina too, and that's one of the gifts of sabbaticals, is that it's an opportunity for the congregation to pause and wonder, where do the specifics of who Christina is in the role end, right? Her gifts, her ministry, where does that end? And where does your identity as a congregation, separate from whoever is in the pulpit, begin? That this is an opportunity for you to think really clearly about that. And your second task is that the big questions are yours. Those deep existential questions that sometimes, right, human systems, we like to task somebody with asking those big existential questions, with holding them in their work. And that often a congregation asks their senior minister to hold those existential questions on their behalf. And sometimes when there's multiple ministers in a congregation and someone goes on sabbatical, they retitle the second minister something like acting lead minister or acting senior minister, temporary, whatever. And we haven't done that. That the responsibility for holding those deep existential questions is not going to become mine in Reverend Christina's absence. It's going to become yours. And that's not to say that I won't be there to accompany you, but at no point will you say, what should we do? And I'll say, wait a minute, I'm channeling Reverend Christina. They're yours. And I'm so grateful that we get to take that journey together.